Socialism. It's a term we hear a lot these days, and we've heard a lot of it throughout the years. It's been a boogie word for many people in capitalistic circles who think that there's nothing more to life than the pursuit, acquisition, and accumulation of capital. Socialism has been used to describe a total authoritarian government. It's been used to describe a lack of wealth and prosperity. It's been used to depict mass murder and dead bodies and all sorts of other horrendous conditions. But that is not in the least what socialism actually is, nor what it stands for. So I'm going to do my best to break down for everybody here how socialism actually works, what it actually is. And I'm going to do my best to try to cover a little bit of its history, from its practices throughout a big government into what it is today in the mindset of modern socialists and how we hope to achieve it moving forward. But in order to start off this conversation, I have to first begin to address its counterpart, which is, of course, capitalism. Now, some people associate capitalism, particularly in neoliberal circles, as analogous to freedom and liberty and happiness and prosperity. But understand something. The word capitalism, capital, is the key word there. And the word capital means wealth that somebody holds. That is their capital. It could be money. It could be a house. It could be possessions such as a car, such as a business. And back in the days of slavery, how many slaves they had was how much capital they had. So as you can see, it's not limited to strictly financial capital. It can also be material capital of other kinds. Now, when socialism came along, there was an understanding among socialists that this type of arrangement, where the people with the capital called the shots, that basically meant that anyone else who wanted a better standard of living had to adhere to the rules and standards set forward by their capitalist counterparts in order to be able to, quote-unquote, make it. But what does it mean to make it? Could you make it in a socialist society? The answer is yes. But what does it mean to make it? Making it is a very subjective term. I mean, the words themselves are very subjective. But to a capitalist, to make it means to achieve the highest level of wealth, power, and godlike status in society that you can. And that, of course, is not just due to raw talent and being a genius and working hard, or as they say, pulling yourself up by your bootstraps. That really has very little, if anything, to do with someone who, quote-unquote, succeeds in capitalism. Capitalism was designed by people with capital to ensure that they continued to have and amass capital. That's why market systems only favor people who have money. People without money, they are at the mercy of those with the capital. That's why we have the employer and employee dynamic. Now, if you take a socialist arrangement, in the past, it was examined by John Locke, by Karl Marx, by Vladimir Lenin, and other people like that the capital class was the oppressor of the working class, or, as Marx put it, the proletariat. Now, the proletariat makes up the vast majority of people, which gives rise to the truism here that most people around the entire world are not driven by profit because of a belief in capitalism. They're profit-driven through their circumstances, because they have to be. They have to be driven by profit in order to stand a chance at getting any of their needs met per the dictations of their capital overlords. That is how the hierarchical structure of capitalism works. It worked under slavery, it worked that way under feudalism, it works that way under capitalism. Socialism actually deals with democracy at the proletariat level. And this is why the capital class hates socialism so much. Because they understand that if democracy were to ever hit the workplace, even in the home, even in schools, in any kind of endeavor, that minimizes their chances of amassing as much wealth and power and prestige and privilege as they would want. So that's how they feel their freedom infringed whenever they see socialist policies being passed. But this is liberating for the working class. Socialism is to the working class what capitalism is to the owner class. And this is really the power dynamic at play, whether you're watching mainstream media, whether you're watching independent media, whether you believe in capitalism, whether you don't, whether you have a traditional job, whether you own a business, whether you are starting a worker co-op, which is a more socialist ideal when it comes to the workplace. The dynamic is always the same. The struggle is always the same. People who want to amass capital and nothing else will always be at odds with people who want to reduce capital to nothing more than what it really is. It's just a tool. Money is simply a tool of trade. And what the capital class has loved to do for so long is present to us this notion that capital, or money in this case, is strictly limited in supply and we have to treat it with care. We can't overspend. We can't tax people too much. We can't do this. We can't do that. Money is limited. We revolve around a system of money. We have to conform our existence to the integrity of money and capitalism. This is the religion of the capital class. In this country, we have created a whole religion out of capitalism. The owner class are the deities, the media, the government, the police, the military, to the extent that they would obey orders from such people. They are all the gatekeepers of this system that is predicated on exploitation, division, and conquering of the proletariat. Now, what socialism does is it gives voice to the proletariat. It allows them to be able to democratically function as a society and determine amongst each other, rather than relying on the orders from somebody high up, what is best for themselves and society. Adam Smith said that society thrives by everybody doing what's best for themselves. This is the quintessential capitalist ideal if you're not doing what you're doing with malicious intent. But what John Nash pointed out in A Beautiful Mind, I'm saying that because that's the only reference that I'm aware of, okay, I'm sure there are more, that he was wrong, that society succeeds in everybody doing what's best for himself and the group. This is where socialism comes in. Because socialism takes into account not just individual happiness, but also collective well-being. Now, this doesn't mean going all out into the, like, say, the Soviet regime or the North Korean regime or even the Chinese regime, which isn't quite as strict as the North Korean or Soviet way was, but it's close. What it means in this case is giving the people a democratic voice in the economy by collective ownership of the means of production. Now, how does this work? Most of us are used to just a single owner of a business or a board of directors with an elected CEO from among the board members. Well, let's take a worker co-op and substitute that in place of a traditional hierarchical corporate kingdom. Instead of a board of directors basically being selected by how much shares they hold, by investing their personal money into it, or by borrowing from banks to do it. This is a technique they use all the time. They basically buy their way onto these boards, which is buying power and influence. And they elect the board of the CEO, whoever is going to be their best lapdog, their bitch, as it were. But what happens in a co-op situation, a more socialist workplace? Well, what happens here is the board of directors is elected by the workers. The CEO is elected by the workers. This makes the board of directors and the CEO accountable to the workers, rather than the workers having to just but stand at attention and obey whatever the boss tells them, and they have no recourse. That's not the case in a socialist economy. In a socialist economy, workers have the real power. Unions, you could argue, may not even be needed in a worker co-op situation, although they do help. Capitalists claim that unions slow down the flow of everything and disrupt production and things like that. And that's without even arguing the fact that they're not going to walk away with as much money in their pockets as they would like. Now, some of this might be true, but in a worker co-op situation, they can actually democratically figure these things out ahead of time before going into production. That way, when they would encounter situations that capitalist enterprises are otherwise unequipped to deal with, they would already have a plan in place to deal with them so things continue to run smoothly. That's an advantage of a co-op. That's an advantage of a socialist enterprise. Notice what's missing here. Notice that I haven't even mentioned government yet. That's because modern day socialism is not predicated on a big government. This is where progressives today and conservatives actually have something in common. We both advocate for a smaller government, but in different ways. The conservative wants the traditional way of looking at government as don't exist, or if you do exist, you're just another ornament on our tree, just for decoration. That's how conservatives and libertarians tend to look at government. Progressives look at government as performing an essential function to fill the gaps that private enterprises and other activities among the people couldn't, or by whatever reason, have been unable to achieve. That's where the government needs to start pulling its weight in the eyes of progressives. This is why we argue for things like universal health insurance, like free college, like a UBI, like housing first, which is the decommodification of housing. Because as progressives, some of us as modern day socialists, we feel that if the basic needs of human life are met by default, then everything else is fine. Everything else can exist how it will. But as long as we have a system of capitalism, of competition, which eventually ends in monopoly, which is not capitalism anymore. It's incredibly totalitarian in a monopolistic system. But if we continue to go in that direction, there is no freedom, there is no liberty, there is no individual pursuit of happiness for the proletariat. It only exists for the owner class. This is why the capital class doesn't want to accommodate the proletariat, because they understand that if socialism takes hold, which it inevitably would if the workers get more power, then they would not be able to be the living gods of Olympus that they are today. We would take them down, figuratively speaking, take them down a few pegs, let them and make them understand, you're part of us too, You didn't get where you were until we started buying into your vision and giving you our money to help you achieve your goal. Without us, the proletariat, you, the owners, are nothing. You would just be specks of history, barely mentioned again. But because so many people have bought into the narrative that capital is king and capitalism is the way of the world, that's how they've been able to achieve that status, and that's how they have this much power. And now people around the world are beginning to realize just how much they've been had. So socialism nowadays emphasizes both individual and collective responsibility in society, but it also makes room for individual pursuits without responsibility otherwise. Like let's say you wanted to, instead of working in an office, being a part of a service industry of some kind, let's say you wanted to be a musician. Or let's say you wanted to draw caricatures on a boardwalk on the beach. Let's say you wanted to start a jazz band. Let's say you wanted to make movies. You had a low budget, but you could find ways to do it with technology as it is today. You get the picture, right? Things that are otherwise considered not marketable, right? This is another word I'm going to come to in a moment. Well, a socialist economy in this respect makes room for people like that so that they are able to prosper in their own way without stepping on the toes of other people. Now, unfortunately, the way it works right now is we have a system where only certain things are considered marketable. And the things that are considered marketable are what the capital class have deemed marketable by what they have come together and said, this will make us the most money. That's what they push on us. That's what they want us to go and pursue in life, to add to their machine, to be cogs in their machine to make them more money. That doesn't help us pursue happiness. It forces us into a form of indentured servitude. And that's why so many people are beginning to realize that democracy in the workplace is not only long overdue, but at this rate, it might even be inevitable. Now, we do have examples of a worker co-op in this country. You have Ocean Spray, the cranberry company. That's a worker co-op. Best cranberries I've ever eaten, I'll tell you that. Now, you've also got the Mondragon Corporation over in Spain. They're a collection of over 200 family-owned co-ops, and it's the 7th most profitable and prosperous company in that country. There are other experiments going on with this around the world, but like any other industry, anything that starts off as a traditional enterprise can fail, and anything that starts off as a co-op can fail. It doesn't mean that a co-op is a bad thing. It just means that, well, we tried, it didn't work. That's sometimes the way it works. But what a socialist economy would do in this case, it would also allow for these people, if they don't make it, to be able to be okay in their failure. In other words, they may not make any profits in a business, they may have to sell the business, they may have to close it down, whatever. But the UBI system, particularly in this scenario, would allow them to sustain themselves until they can figure something else out. Because see, in our current system, we just don't have anything for people to figure anything out. We are at the mercy of the capital class. We are at the mercy of the dictations of those who lord over us because of their massive amounts of capital, influence, and power. That's why they love capitalism so much. That's why they've been pushing it down our throats, because that is their drug of choice, really. Power and wealth are their drugs of choice. And capitalism is the vehicle that gets them there. And to them, we're just parts in that vehicle for them. We just have to operate as part of the whole vehicle for them. But a socialist economy dismantles that completely and says, no, it doesn't have to be like that. The proletariat doesn't have to rely on a few unelected elites at the top who think that they're better, who think they're smarter, who think they're just like more civilized and more respectable. Well, these are all very subjective terms. And as I was explaining to Nina Turner in a Twitter thread recently, civility and decorum as declared by the elites when somebody yells at them, that's just a way of trying to keep people's emotional outrage in check so that they can more easily find a way into their head and manipulate them towards their capitalistic ends, making them another cog in the machine. But remember that next time you see any of these establishment politicians talk about civility and decorum. We need to give them the old stone cold 316 treatment, you know what I'm saying? Maybe not in a literal sense, but definitely show them that we mean business and don't give in to their demands for civility and decorum when we're pissed off. I mean, that's the only way they listen. But at any event, when you give workers a direct say in how a company works, that gives them more skin in the game. It gives them a reason to perform on the job better. It gives them a reason to want a job in the first place. That's why more collective ownership is not only a good idea, maybe even inevitable, but it's also necessary to get out of this rut that we're in. Workers have felt disenfranchised in this country for decades. And if we want to take back power, we have to start embracing socialism. And it starts by understanding the differences between the socialisms of the past and the socialism of today. So what we're talking about now, we're not talking about the socialist regimes of the Soviet Union or China or North Korea or Cuba or anything like that. We're talking about a democratized economy which comes from the ground. It comes from the workers, not the government. The government is supposed to be subservient to the people. And right now what we have is a government that is subservient to capital, not the people. If this were a more socialistic setting, the government would be 100% accountable to the people and not to capital, because the people would control the capital. You see how that's working now? So modern socialism does not advocate for a big government So all these guys who chant their little down with big government, they don't know what they're talking about. And the sad truth is that a lot of them just refuse to listen to us. They refuse to really take in what we're talking about. They think that, oh, well, these guys are like the communists of the Soviet Union. Oh, these guys are like the North Koreans. Oh, they're like Cuba. They're like Venezuela. They want to turn us into a bunch of dead bodies and slaves. Rah! That's not true at all. It's not true at all. We are a lot like those people who kind of spit in our eye whenever we give them these ideas. We want smaller government, but unlike them, we don't want government to not exist. We know government is critical. We want government to be totally subservient to the people, not to capital. Which means in order to do that, you have to put the capital in the hands of the people. That's how that has to work. That's the only way to make government subservient to the people, because the government is funded by the people. And the more people in society have the capital, the more people the government will be subservient to. That's how that's supposed to work. And that's why modern day socialists advocate for a democratized economy. Because that way, you have a democratic process in the economy that can mitigate the chances of one or a small group of people emerging to the top to exploit everybody and consolidate power, turning an otherwise free society into their little gaggle of slaves. Which is kind of what it feels like today, right? We don't want that. Like these people on the right, we as progressives, we want freedom, we want liberty, and we want people to be happy. But capitalism is not the way to do it. Capitalism has brought us almost nothing but pain and suffering, and some people have been happy, but those are the people who already either had capital or knew people with capital and have managed to use their connections and their advantages to manipulate their way to the top. They didn't actually earn the wealth and privilege and influence and power that they have. It was literally given to them. That's why the myth of a meritocracy is important to understand too. It's very, very important that we not, confuse a meritocracy with capitalism or a meritocracy with the way to do things. Because even then, that type of system still creates a whole bunch of losers unnecessarily, unjustifiably, and leaves people who already had capital and just amass even more at the top. A socialistic economy makes it so that merit is determined democratically, or if you want to do things on your own, if you had a UBI system, the merits are all your own there. You see, more people are free in this case. More people are able to determine their own future. More people are able to experience liberty and freedom and happiness. That's what modern day socialism is all about. It's not about, a big government takeover of everything. In fact, just to put a little icing on the cake there, when we talk about the term Medicare for all, I like to use universal health insurance because that's really what it is. It's not giving the government the authority or even permission to dictate healthcare to people. It simply acts as a filter for the tax dollars. That's all it does. That is literally all it does in that case. The doctors, the specialists, nurses, the pharmacists, the hospitals, the people on the ground, they would run the system. The government simply distributes the money where it's needed. That's all that happens. So that's not a big government because the government is not actively deciding what goes on in healthcare. But some stuff does have to happen. I mean, you've got to make sure that people can get the care and, not go bankrupt, obviously. I mean, that still happens today, but the problem is people still go bankrupt because the doctors and hospitals can charge people like that because it's a market-based system. Healthcare is considered a commodity today. Socialism views healthcare as a human right because it is something people need in their life, like water, like food, like clothing, like a roof over one's head, like love from parents or a partner or whatever. These are all physiological needs people have by virtue of the fact that they're human beings. Healthcare is the same way. That's why we need it in the form of a public good, not as a commodity. So that's what modern day socialism is really about. It's about democratizing the workplace. It's not about big government. It's about utilizing government in a way that is most effective for everyone in society and making it completely subservient to the will of the people. That is what socialism is all about. So I hope you guys learned something here. I hope you understand what I've been saying. If you have any questions, leave them down below. And if you like my content, hit the subscribe button, hit that bell. It really helps in the algorithm. And I will be back soon.